Brunhilde of Austrasia, the most powerful queen in 6th century Europe, captured at 70 years old, tortured for 3 days, then tied to 4 wild horses and torn apart alive. Brunhilde ruled the Frankish kingdoms of Austrasia and Burgundy for nearly 40 years, first as regent for her son, then for her grandsons. When King Clothar II finally defeated her in 613 AD, he tortured her for 3 full days before the execution. Then he tied her by her hair, 1 hand, and 1 foot to 4 wild horses driven in opposite directions simultaneously. What remained was burned, so no tomb could ever be built for her. Jezebel, the most feared queen in the ancient world, thrown from a window by her own servants, trampled by horses, and eaten by dogs. They couldn't find enough of her left to bury. When the military commander Jehu led a coup against her dynasty, Jezebel didn't flee. She painted her face and taunted him from an upper window. Jehu ordered her own eunuchs to throw her down. She was trampled immediately. When men came to bury her, the ancient record states they found only her skull, her feet, and the palms of her hands. Everything else was gone. Elizabeth Bathory, the most prolific female serial killer in recorded history, walled alive inside her own castle with a slot for food, found dead alone inside the sealed room 4 years later. Between 1590 and 1610, Bathory allegedly tortured and murdered hundreds of young women at Castle Chactis. Over 300 witnesses testified. The highest victim count cited was 650. Her servants were executed in 1611. Bathory herself was never tried. She was too powerful. Instead, her rooms were sealed shut with a single slot for food. She lived that way for 4 years. On August 21, 1614, her food was untouched. She was found dead on the floor. Anne Boleyn, the Queen of England, beheaded by her own husband on charges he invented himself. Her head was wrapped in cloth and buried in an unmarked grave the same afternoon. Anne Boleyn became queen in 1533 after Henry II broke with the Catholic Church to marry her. 3 years later, when she failed to produce a male heir, he had her arrested on charges of adultery, incest, and treason, charges historians have since concluded were fabricated. She was convicted May 15, 1536, executed 4 days later on Tower Green. Henry had imported a French swordsman for a cleaner strike. He announced his next engagement the following morning. Mary, Queen of Scots, the most famous prisoner in English history. It took the executioner 3 strikes to remove her head. When he held it up, her hair came off in his hand. It was a wig. Mary was imprisoned by Queen Elizabeth I for 19 years before Elizabeth signed her death warrant. On February 8, 1587, at Fotheringhay Castle, Mary dressed in deep crimson, the Catholic color of martyrdom. The first strike missed and hit the back of her skull. The third finally severed her head. Her auburn hair came away in the executioner's hand. A wig. Beneath it, her real hair was short and gray. Her small dog had been hiding under her skirts the entire time. Marie Antoinette, the Queen of France, separated from her children, accused of crimes against her own son, and executed by guillotine in front of a screaming crowd at 37 years old. By 1793, the revolution had imprisoned her, taken her children, and charged her with treason and sexual abuse of her own 8-year-old son, almost certainly fabricated. When the accusation was read aloud, Marie Antoinette appealed to every mother in the room, saying she left it to nature itself to judge. The crowd went silent. She was found guilty regardless. On October 16, 1793, the guillotine blade fell at 12:15 in the afternoon. Wu Zetian, the only female emperor in Chinese history, ruled for decades. Then in 705 AD, a palace coup stripped her of everything while she lay dying. She was forced to abdicate on her deathbed. Wu Zetian entered the imperial court as a concubine to Emperor Taizong at the age of 14. She survived his death, outlasted his successor, and by 690 AD had declared herself Emperor of China, the first and only woman in 4,000 years of Chinese imperial history to hold that title in her own name. She ruled for 15 years. Then, in February 705, as she lay gravely ill, a group of officials and generals led by Zhang Jianzhi stormed the palace. Her 2 closest advisors, the Zhang brothers on whom she depended entirely, were executed on the spot. On February 20, 705, Empress Wu lost power. On February 21st, she was forced to abdicate. On February 22nd, imperial authority was formally transferred back to her son, Li Xian. She died on December 16, 705, at the age of 81, stripped of her title, stripped of her empire, in the same palace where she had once commanded everything. Empress Irene of Byzantium, the most powerful woman in the Byzantine Empire, blinded her own son to keep the throne, then was overthrown, exiled to a tiny island, and forced to spin wool to survive, died alone. Irene of Athens served as regent for her son Constantine VI after her husband's death in 780 AD. By 797, when Constantine attempted to rule independently and sideline her completely, Irene had him arrested in the same purple chamber where he had been born. She ordered his eyes gouged out, a punishment deliberately chosen because Byzantine law barred the blind from holding imperial power. Constantine likely died from the injuries. Irene ruled alone as empress from 797 to 802, the first woman to hold the Byzantine throne in her own name. Then, in October 802, while she slept, a palace coup deposed her overnight. She was stripped of all imperial property, exiled first to the island of Lesbos, then to the island of Principo. According to Wikipedia, she survived by spinning wool to support herself. She died on August 9, 803, less than a year after losing everything, alone on a small island, doing manual labor to eat. Fredegund, a servant girl who murdered her way to the throne of Francia, spent 30 years killing everyone around her, died in 597 AD, and nobody was certain whether it was natural or whether someone had finally gotten to her first. Fredegund began her life as a palace servant in the Merovingian court. She became the mistress of King Chilperic I, then manipulated him into divorcing and later killing his existing wife Galswintha, whose murder triggered one of the most brutal royal feuds in medieval European history, a 50-year war with Queen Brunhilde of Austrasia. Over the following decades, Fredegund was credibly accused of ordering the assassination of multiple bishops, her own stepson, several political rivals, and, according to some sources, engineering attacks on Brunhilde herself. She ruled as regent for her son Clothar II after Chilperic's own assassination in 584, a murder some historians have also attributed to her. She died in Paris in either 596 or 597 AD. The cause was recorded as natural. Given the trail of bodies behind her, historians have noted the irony that the woman who arranged so many deaths may have simply died in her bed. Ranavalona I, the queen who cut her country's population in half. When she finally died in 1861, a barrel of gunpowder exploded at her own funeral and killed the mourners who came to bury her. Ranavalona I became sovereign of Madagascar in 1828 and ruled for 33 years. Under her reign, European missionaries were expelled, Christianity was banned, and the use of forced labor, known as Fanampoana, was extended so aggressively that historians estimate Madagascar's population fell from approximately 5 million to 2.5 million during her rule. That is 2.5 million people dead from war, forced labor, execution, and famine, attributed directly to her policies. She expelled every French and British presence from the island and executed subjects suspected of Christian conversion. When she died peacefully in her sleep on August 16, 1861, at the Manjacamiadana Palace in Antananarivo, a ceremonial gun salute was fired during her funeral. One of the powder barrels exploded. It killed several of the people who had come to mourn her. Even her funeral was fatal. Catherine de' Medici, the woman who ruled France for 30 years through her sons, died alone in January 1589, abandoned, ignored, and broken by the last thing her own son did before she took her final breath. Catherine de' Medici was born an orphan, married into the French royal family at 14, and was largely ignored for the first 2 decades of her marriage. Then her husband died, and 3 of her sons became kings of France in succession. She ruled through all 3 of them. She has been blamed, with genuine historical basis, for ordering or enabling the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre of August 1572, in which thousands of Huguenot Protestants were killed across France in a single night. By 1589, her last surviving son, Henry III, had become king. On the day she was dying, January 5, 1589, Henry ordered the assassination of Cardinal Henry of Guise. When news of the murder reached her, Catherine reportedly said it would destroy him. She died the same day, aged 69, from pleurisy. Henry III was himself assassinated 7 months later. She had spent 30 years keeping the French throne alive. She died the day her last son signed his own death warrant. Mary I of England, Bloody Mary, burned 280 people alive at the stake. Died alone in 1558. Husband gone, country celebrating her replacement. 2 false pregnancies, and her Protestant half-sister already being cheered in the streets outside. Mary I became the first Queen Regnant of England in 1553, inheriting a country that had been Protestant for 2 decades. She immediately moved to restore Catholicism. Between 1555 and 1558, according to Wikipedia and Britannica, 283 Protestants were burned at the stake under her orders, earning her the name Bloody Mary, a name that has followed her for 500 years. She married Philip II of Spain in 1554, but Philip left England within a year and barely returned. Mary suffered 2 false pregnancies. When she died on November 17, 1558, Philip had been absent for months. Her council had already shifted its loyalty to Elizabeth, and Protestants across England were openly celebrating before she had finished dying. She had burned nearly 300 people trying to save a country that had already decided it did not want saving. When Elizabeth I was announced as queen, the crowds in London reportedly lit bonfires in the streets. Cleopatra, the last pharaoh of Egypt, chose death by snakebite rather than be paraded through Rome in chains. When she died, Egypt ceased to exist as an independent nation forever. Cleopatra VII ruled Egypt from 51 BC and spent the final decades of her reign keeping her country alive through strategic alliances with Rome, first with Julius Caesar, then with Mark Antony. When Antony's forces were defeated by Octavian in 30 BC and Antony died by his own hand, Cleopatra understood exactly what came next. Octavian wanted to parade her through the streets of Rome in chains as the centerpiece of his triumph, a public display of conquest. She refused. On August 10, 30 BC, she died in her mausoleum in Alexandria. The cause recorded by ancient sources including Plutarch and Strabo was the bite of an asp, an Egyptian cobra, though some historians now argue it may have been poison administered by other means. 2 of her handmaidens died alongside her. When Octavian arrived and found her dead, there was nothing left to parade. Egypt became a Roman province immediately. 3,000 years of pharaonic civilization ended the afternoon she made that choice.